In fact, it's pretty obvious. If you had a quick walk around the car, you know, all the outer panel work is essentially on there now, so it's starting to look totally like a car rather than just a sort of half torn apart relic now. A lot of progress has happened on the car since we last kind of filmed it, because obviously the last episode we went to see some of the engine work being done at Cosworth. So, you know, everybody's been screaming and shouting, saying, oh, we need to see more work on the car, we need to see more work on the car. But I think it was kind of important to show the planning stages, and something we've said from the start was that we'd like to show not just the work we're doing on the car, but if we're getting other people to build stuff, it'd be nice to show those bits being done as well. So that was kind of why the Cosworth visit was thrown in there. But consequently, because it's been a long while since we were last actually looking at work on the car, we've done quite a lot on it. In fact, it's pretty obvious. If you had a quick walk around the car, you know, all the outer panel work is essentially on there now, so it's starting to look totally like a car rather than just a sort of half torn apart relic now. I think when we last filmed, we were talking about the metalwork at the front. We were doing the inner front panel regarding the radiator and the oil cooler installation, and then I think Gordon came over and was doing a trial sitting. So since then, if we start at the front, we finished all the metalwork for the oil cooler arrangement. We did a load of modifications on the slam panel regarding the radiator, so we've kind of just made this all meet up much more pleasingly with where the radiator sits. We've got the outer front panel on. That's just a standard replacement panel, which was pretty good actually. The fit of that was reasonably pleasing. There's a few bits to tweak, as there often is, but not too bad. And then coinciding really nicely with that, the carbon bonnet arrived, which when you're doing sort of composite panels on a car, you obviously can't change the shape of the panel. Once it's done, it's done. You can't really go adding width or length to it, so you really need to start with the carbon bits and then align all the steel parts to that, because it's a lot easier to change the shape of the steel bits. Yeah, with the bonnet, one thing we did have to do, because most of these are being marketed to the motorsport scene, they don't put any of the hardware in for the bonnet catches, because they're normally going to be on pins. So that was the sort of major change we did to the bonnet, was adding, there's a metal plate which we've put in under here, which is almost goes all the way across there, and it's got nuts welded to it there and there, which are for the main kind of striker pin there, and the safety catch bolts on there. And we cut a slot in the back here. We tried to do it as small as possible, so the thing was kind of threaded in really awkwardly and then bonded in the inside there. But we've done a slot that's kind of just about the width of my hand here, that whole metal plate was threaded in through, and then clamped through and bonded onto the other side, the underside of that hollow section there. So we've kind of got the hardware there to mount all the original catches. It did come obviously with the hinge mounts, and yeah, the quality of the bonnet's pretty good, to be honest. We've been happy with that, and the clearance is as it was when we mocked up the steel one. It's tight on the cam cover, but there is room. So we got the carbon bonnet on there, and then it was a case of getting the replacement wings on and getting those all aligned, which, as usual with pattern parts normally, was a complete pain. These wings were out of shape in a lot of areas, particularly down the back. So we did a lot of work reshaping the rear edge of the wing. I think we ended up actually unfolding the fold on the back and adding about 5 mil down the back and refolding it, and also adjusting the profile along here to match the bonnet more pleasingly. I mean, there's still a little bit of work to be done on the wings, but they're pretty much there. There was some work done around this edge here as well. This sort of inner section, there's a welded piece on here that meets up with the front panel, which just wasn't in the right place, so we had to unspot weld those, modify them and re-spot weld them in the right place so it all met up nicely. But we got there in the end. We're getting there. There's still a little bit of work just to get the lines a bit crisper and get the meat up to the valance better. I think they're just screwed on at the minute, so they've not been welded on for the final time. But we're pretty happy with how the gaps are all sitting now. Got the gap to the scuttle nice, the gaps to the wings are okay. So that's reasonably pleasing. Once we got kind of the wings and the front valance and all of that lot set, that then allowed us to move on to doing the doors. And there was a bit of an about turn on the doors. If you remember in the earlier episodes, we talked about doing the carbon boot and bonnet and then doing aluminium skins on the doors. That was the plan. Then we started getting sort of ever extending lead time, shall we say, on the aluminium door skins, which are handmade to order. And in the meantime, I also saw in person some aluminium skins that were done for a Cortina, and I had concerns over the fact that they're not particularly straight, shall we say. I mean, they were pretty good, but you know, we want, when we do the painted finish on this, we want it to be absolutely crack on, you know, like perfect ripple free when you look along the lines. And we were worried that with the aluminium skins being not absolutely dead straight, we'd end up having to put that much filler or, you know, build primer on them that they'd probably end up weighing more than steel skins. You know, and for a huge amount of cost and hassle involved in the meantime, you know, it started to become not a very obvious choice. Potentially we were going to end up with extra cost, extra hassle, you know, the potential corrosion issues with aluminium and steel as well, all for something which might actually be heavier in the end. So kind of gone around the houses with that, we actually decided to just go with the steel ones. You know, the final kind of decider on that being that the steel skins, these ones are really, really good quality. You know, they are absolutely perfectly formed because they're pressed with a decent press tool rather than being handmade. So we stripped the old skins off the doors, so it was just the framework in there. We had to do some repair work on the hinges because they were completely worn out and make some new pins for them. We epoxy primed the inside of these new outer skins, and also at the same time as the skins were removed, we epoxy primed the part of the inner framework that you can't get to once the skin's attached. So all of the inner hidden parts of the doors are all protected. And then fitted the new skin, which is pretty much a case of putting it over the frame, having an adhesive around there, and then hammer forming the sort of lip round onto the frame. It's fairly standard stuff for somebody who's used to doing door skin repairs. Once we got the doors re-skinned and we're totally happy with the gaps all around them, we turned our attention to the interior. We talked previously about the interior design revisions, and obviously we had a fairly lengthy chat with Gordon about what we were going to do on the interior. The reason for having that discussion with Gordon about the interior design changes at this stage was because there's going to be metalwork involved in that. You know, a lot of people have been sort of saying, why are you going into so much detail now? And it's important to do that because a lot of it affects what we're doing now. We don't want to be kind of painting the shell and then finding we've got to cut bits back out of it again to make changes. So you'll probably see straight away there's quite a substantial change to the look of the dashboard. From that point down, we've completely scratch made that dash, and the sort of main feature is the instrument panel that sits here with the auxiliary gauges, and then there's going to be the heater controls and the headlight control underneath there. And we've actually changed the shape of the entire lower part of the dash for a number of reasons. We've deepened this whole section here and made it slightly more vertical. And the reason for making that deeper is kind of threefold. The first reason is having this instrument panel here with a shallower dash would mean a much deeper drop down section, which would start to look cosmetically out of proportion with the rest. The second reason is, you probably remember Gordon had a seating position that was way back, you know, almost in the back of the car, and the steering wheel a lot lower. You know, the steering wheel was probably 4 inches, or the column here at this point was about 3 inches lower than standard, I think. So from a cosmetic point of view, it was going to be difficult to make a column much lower and not just look like a sort of hanging down appendage on the bottom of the dash. And also from a strength point of view, difficult to make a mounting for it that's that far below anything structural. So it made sense to drop the whole dash down and have a structural part of it that we could mount the column to, so it's strong, but also kind of cosmetically you don't have this column hanging down miles below the dash. And thirdly, the revised heater box arrangement that we're going to put in will sit behind the dash, and this extra depth gives us a little bit more sort of area to hide that away behind the dash. So there's a few reasons for making those changes. The way we've done this also to incorporate a lot of strength is there's a tube behind here, 38mm. I mean, there's a substantial, almost like roll cage tubing here, which runs all the way across, follows that line down and back up the other side and curves in to both pillars and actually attaches to the pillars and forms a pretty structural part of the car. So we've added a lot of strength to the shell at that point. The steering column is then mounted directly to that tube, so it's absolutely, solidly mounted to the shell. And it also gave us quite an easy way of achieving a nice radius on the bottom here. All of the sheet metal work is obviously just handmade panel work, and then this kind of bead that runs around the perimeter here was designed to sort of replicate the original shape of the original pressing there, and we just made a tool for our Pullmax sort of reciprocating hammer, so we could form that bead all the way around that section. We've then added the vent holes each side for the extra vents we're going to add. These are going to be these Audi vents here, which the centre two are actually going to stay in the original position, and then we're just adding another two on each side. So yeah, pretty major changes on the dash. Steering column is now not an Escort steering column. It's actually a steering column from an Opel Manta, which we've kind of chosen because dimensionally it was almost perfect, and it has a collapsible section in it, so it's a little nicer from a safety point of view. So it's if you have a big accident, rather than a solid bar coming up and spearing you in the head, in theory it collapses, which would be preferable. We're still the sort of decision's still out on the switchgear. We kind of haven't touched on that yet. We've talked about between us about doing our own design of switchgear for it, which would be nice. I mean, the Manta does actually have quite a nice, simple single stalk that does a lot of functions, but there's a question mark there. It seems we're going to this extent. We're kind of thinking, do we really want to use a 1980s indicator stalk, even though it's infinitely better than the Escort one, which just falls apart every time you use it? Yeah, I don't know. We'll have to make a decision on that one still. And yeah, the pedals looking down in that direction was another thing. Obviously, when Gordon was here, he was talking about wanting them a bit further over so he had room for a clutch rest. So we've re-angled both the pedals to bring them further to the right, so there's kind of space for a foot between the clutch and the tunnel now. Immediately after Gordon's trial fitting, he had the seat just mounted on some real temporary kind of flimsy brackets. We've now made up the final brackets for that now, so the seat mounts are done. And then we had to do this cross-member section here, which kind of adds a structural section for where the gearbox cross-member bolts in underneath. There was originally a cross-member in the Escort, a different position. I think it was further back. So we've added this structure here, which kind of ties all the way across, and then underneath this section there's a cross-member that goes underneath the tunnel and adds the strength in, and then the cross-member bolts underneath this point here. So basically you've got like a real sturdy section running all the way across the width of the car over the tunnel, and then it's kind of closed in by the gearbox cross-member underneath. And then the final bit we've been working on, in fact just earlier today, was this sort of bulkhead panel that's going to sit behind the seats, which again has a couple of purposes. It adds strength to the shell there, but it also stops luggage flying around. He wants this luggage storage area in here, and obviously driving the car in a spirited fashion, which I imagine he will, you don't want things flying around when you hit the brake, so the secondary purpose of that is just to keep things in place when they're put behind there. So this is not even attached at the minute. This is a piece Stu is working on today, and we've just hand formed this, made some press tools to press these sections in to make it look a little more sort of factory and original, and then that just sits into place here, which pretty much finishes the metalwork inside from kind of behind the seat forwards, and then leads on to the gaping hole in the back here, which is what we're working on at the minute. So there's an enormous void where we've cut out all of the rear bulkhead, and that's sort of all tied into the changes we're making with the rear suspension.
We've made a bit of progress since last time. We've got some bits attached to the back of the car now, which is a bit of progress. The drawing that you saw last time, the CAD drawing, is now turned into a big lump of nicely machined aluminium by Alitech at Silverstone. They did a very nice job of machining that. A bit nerve-wracking because it was quite an expensive piece if it went wrong, so we're very happy with that. That's really good. We've had a bit of a mock-up on the bench, and that all went well. Everything lines up. We finished a bit more of the front of the subframe. Got this moustache bar, as I call it. There's a sort of a bent bar across the front that holds the front subframe locating points. Got that bent and shaped and welded into the front carrier. There's another plate that's got to go on, the double shear plate that holds the other side of the front wishbone mount. That's still got to go on. And the diagonals are tacked on now. And then this side's sort of loosely mocked up with the wishbone. There's the toe link still got to go in here on the other side of the wishbone. That's not that critical for positioning of anything. That can be done on the bench later on. And then the upright's just loosely chucked on at the moment, just to give us an idea of where everything is. There's obviously going to be a strut coming off there, going up into a turret that we've got to fabricate into the arch tubs. We're putting the tubs in first, and then we'll put the turrets into the tubs afterwards. The strut, wherever I've put it, here we are. The strut, I've done a mock-up strut, which is Freelander upright, as talked about before. We're going to lose this bottom lug, that's going to be cut off. We'll lose that, but otherwise it'll be a standard Freelander upright, so it's sort of easy enough to replace should you ever need to. I'd hope you didn't need to, but and then we're doing a camber adjustment through pucks on the upright. So basically that sets the camber, that just pivots in there. Bottom bolt's done up, so I can't show you, but basically that pivots and gives you about 2.5 degrees of camber adjustment either way, so there's plenty enough there. And then the pucks drop in so that can't slip and adjust itself over time. Once it's set, that gets done up and that's fixed. So the strut body then will go up into the turret. It'll be coil over, adjustable platform damper, so we can set ride height, and that's where that's at. There's a couple of things. We were pondering whether it would all fit under the standard floor, and it nearly does, but not quite. It's very tight just under the back of the boot floor, so we've got to modify that. And we're going to have to do a little bit of a modification further forward to get the exhaust through, but nothing too drastic. Stu started bracketing. We've got the outermost brackets fitted to the shelf that are carrying the frame. That's fitted with dummy aluminium bushes at the moment, just to align it. Now those bushes are actually slightly wider than the final polyurethane bushes will be, so that we've got some fine-tuning adjustments in there. There'll be some stainless steel shims that go in either side of the brackets on that, just to fine tune the adjustment of the subframe within the shell. At the moment, they're 2mm wider, the aluminium bushes, than the final bushes will be that go in there. The next phases are to do the remaining brackets that bracket the subframe to the shell. They'll be finally welded once the shell's back on the spit, so we can spin it upside down to do the welds more easily. We don't really want to weld upside down where we don't have to, so they'll be finished then. But it's make the other brackets on there, modify the boot floor. We're modifying the rear section of the boot floor for clearance of the subframe and for exhaust clearance. So we've got to modify that. I need to make the toe links for the rear suspension there. I need to make the double shear brackets for the front brace bar, front moustache bar as I call it, and then I've got to make the double shear brackets that come off the back of the frame here and pick up the other side of the lower bushes there. Got to make those. Do the turrets, put the shock absorbers into the turrets. At that point, it's pretty much got all the rear suspension. Yeah, I'm happy with the way it's all come out so far. Touch wood. I think everything's worked out about how I wanted it to. We'll see when it gets the first test drives. That will be the proof of the pudding. I can see we'll be playing with dampers a bit. We're playing with dampers and spring rates a bit. But the main thing is I wanted it just to be more refined than a live axle. Without adding too much more weight compared to a live axle, and I see no reason it won't do that, as long as we get the damping right. Yeah, I think most of the rear end is sort of falling into place.
Yeah, a lot of people have sort of commented on wanting more actual progress in the YouTube videos, more work being done on the car, shall we say. And it's sort of, to understand why that's not the case, you've got to understand, you know, why that we are building a car. We're a business building this car, and the video series was only ever thought up to just cover what's involved with a typical build on a car. You know, we are funding the video ourselves, and to have somebody covering every bit of work on the car, we need a full-time member of staff just filming what was going on, which is not something we can afford to do. And also it's not something that's overly practical to do. We'd have to have that, you know, the stuff would have to be microphoned, and there's so much noise going on, half the time you wouldn't be able to hear what they were saying anyway. But everything we do is photographed and posted on a Facebook page, which is a Facebook page specifically for this project. We have a Facebook page for every project we do. So if you go on Facebook and search for Gordon's Mark 1, you'll find the page for this, and all the photographs are split down into albums for each step. So there's a metalwork album, and you can literally see every component we've made being made and being welded in, etc. There's always kind of ups and downs through a project. You know, there's like the downer of seeing what condition the shell's in, and then the metalwork just seems to drag on, and there's hours and hours and hours of labour going in for what appears to be not that much progress visibly, and then suddenly all the outer panel work goes on, and then you get dry build, and then if you get to the point of seeing it on its wheels with kind of the final stance to it, you know, the excitement levels just go massive, and that's the point where you start visualising what it's going to be like, you know, really in detail finished. But then of course it's stripped down, and then it goes in, you know, you start to prep it for paint, and that just seems to be hours and hours and hours of sanding with very little visible progress. But then suddenly, in the space of a day, the paint goes on and it totally transforms. So there's a lot, you know, there's a lot of ups and downs like that, and then it's very exciting, particularly for me at that stage when it's a painted shell, because it comes through into the sort of build area of the workshop, which is kind of my main area. So then it's the sort of exciting bit of bolting shiny bits onto a freshly painted shell, which is like the dream situation for any car enthusiast, is having basically a brand new painted shell in front of them and getting to just bolt shiny stuff on. So there's lots of ups and downs, but yeah, it's at the stage now where I'm kind of, excitement levels are fairly high, because you close the doors on it and it's a car, you know, all the panels are there, whereas when it had quarter panels removed and floors removed, you can't help but think, Blimey, this is a very expensive skeleton of steel. Cool. I'm not, you know what, I'm not in the mood for this today, I don't know why. I need to go out to my trailer and get some makeup. My makeup's not done, I can't possibly manage this.